working from home, and Zoom culture. How long will it last? This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to keep you up on all the latest from MacVoices. Watch or listen to MacVoices straight from your email client. Sign up at macvoices.com/newsletter and stay up to date. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is part 2 in a 3-part conversation on MacVoices Live about the pandemic and working from home 1 year later, what it's meant to all of us, and the implications for the past and the future. In the first part, our panel shared some of their personal experiences working from home and how it's made a difference to some people and how it was just business as usual for others. This time, we start to dig specifically into Zoom culture and video conferencing and what it has meant and what it may mean for the future of business and the new normal. So let's go right back to the panel. Let's go to the socialization part, though. And I know, let's see, I've got to find it here, but Kelly couldn't be with us tonight. But Kelly, where is it? She said that the one thing she learned was that the best thing she could do every day was to leave the house and go do something because it just wasn't great being at home. So that was her take on it. Anybody else feel I think we all to some degree miss the socialization, but did it become a major issue for any of you? Yeah, and did some of the virtual events, whether they were formal or informal, help?
I'd like to say first that my answer is being provided by Coca-Cola. It's weird. When I'm doing writing of reviews and stuff, and everybody always tells me that they like to listen to music in the background and stuff like that, or the TV running and stuff like that. I can't do it. That just takes me out of the zone. I lose all focus because I find myself wanting to turn my head to look at the TV or stop for a second because this is my favorite part of the song. And then all of a sudden trying to get back into the zone on doing like a review, that takes like 10, 20 minutes. So for me, it's kind of strange. Dead silence. I don't know if it's just the buzzing in my head that goes on or what, but dead silence works for me when I'm writing.
That's changed for me too. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I just listened to music constantly. And
now that we're in our 40s.
Plus.
Whatever. I don't know. There was some sort of a transition. And now I can't listen. I can't listen to music in the background. And I think back and, I used to listen to Pink Floyd and Pat Benatar while I was, Led Zeppelin while I was programming. And I'm like, how did I do that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And at some point, I know nobody's done it yet, but it's possible they will any second, jump in here and say, well, what's this have to do with Apple and Mac and tech? And I think just the very nature, if this pandemic had happened 20 years ago, it would have been a much bigger, no, scratch that. It would have been a much different deal because you didn't have the technology. I mean, we're talking now about our ability to work at home. You wouldn't have been able to work at home. So, you would have had to make
that report. It's fine.
Well, to a point, Brittany.
I'm kidding, Chuck.
I know.
A lot more people would have gotten sick because we would have made different choices.
Well, look at the Spanish flu of the late, 1918, 1919. So many people died because if they didn't work, they didn't have money, and then they didn't have food.
They have food, and they went. Yeah.
Of course, the flip side is people weren't flying around on airplanes.
But they were deep. They were deep into the industrial age. So if you lived anywhere near a city, you were working in a factory, which meant you were around a lot of other people.
Just to answer your previous question and to kind of tie into what you're talking about now, like you can almost say one word and it kind of brings up a new idea. Zoom. We probably all knew what Zoom was before, COVID, but did our parents, did our relatives, did the people next door Most people didn't know
No.
what Zoom was.
Now they're dragged into it.
Yeah, and now it's a verb. Now it somehow beat Skype, which I still don't know what happened there. But,
it's like, hand me a Kleenex.
That's all
hand me a Kleenex, let's Zoom.
But I mean, thinking about how complete industries have changed. I mean, my job is to go to conferences and meetups and give talks. Like, that's what I do. It's quote unquote travel around the world. Now it's travel around the internet and give talks. And we have changed how that entire industry works. There are people in my industry that are writing books on, like, here's how you set up a Zoom, your Zoom setup, and here's why you should get a green screen, and here's why, like, all of this other stuff that my industry did not care about 2 years ago. And I think that, I mean, we look at what Apple had to do, releasing a patch so that you could quickly switch to Touch ID when it detects that you're wearing a mask. Like, this is something that people in industries as a whole have now shifted the way that they come to market, the way that they develop their products, and then ultimately the way that they have to deal when stuff breaks down. Like right now, we're dealing with the chip shortage. So, I mean, this whole thing is tech related because it has completely rocked how tech works and how the tech industry works.
It's also become proof of concept. I mean, people talked about this in the early days of computers, that we would have more free time. Yuck, yuck. Once we had all these computers and stuff and we could meet up with everybody. But we never got around to it or trying it. And now with the pandemic, we've been forced into it. And it's, like I said, it's sort of been proof of concept. It can be done. Now, how that's going to affect human behavior, that would be something Brittany probably could address.
And it's not that it's a bad thing either, because I mean, telehealth, got better. There's a lot of industries that improved because of this. It's just a matter of that they had to, like, they didn't have a choice. And I mean, to me, I'm in some ways looking forward to the end of this to see what stays, what sticks, versus what we go back to because we just liked it the old way better.
And that's the perfect segue, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. I wanted to go into the Zoom, what has become kind of the Zoom culture. And I wanted to go back to something Mark said, though, because Mark, you've kind of indicated that the Zooms have expanded a little bit. I found sort of just the opposite, that now you don't just, not many, I don't think, just have that monthly meeting or that weekly meeting just because. Now you kind of have to have a reason to get on Zoom, to ask somebody to come to do a Zoom. And I don't know if it's because people were avoiding Zoom or what, but I feel like things have become a bit more intentional with Zoom meetings, as opposed to just having that, that weekly staff meeting or that weekly sales meeting. And that's been my experience from it, but I don't know if anybody else agrees with that. And Mark, apparently you don't. You've seen it go the other way.
So maybe I miscommunicated. I'm not saying that there are more meetings being hosted over Zoom. The point I want to make is that what I've noticed is that unlike days of old where people would use audio only, it seems now that Zoom meetings are providing social contact that used to happen in walking to a conference room or grabbing a coffee or other things, so that what previously were focused discussions now have, via Zoom in a virtual sense, now have the taste and character of in-person meetings. And the measure of that is the ratio of the amount of time that's spent on whatever the announced topic is for the meeting get together versus other chit chat that occurs within that overall session.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know that Zoom fatigue, that term came out early on, and I was listening to a podcast earlier this week that said the New York Times was the one that coined the phrase, and they brought it out of an article about everything that was wrong with Zoom. And it's too bad. I have to wonder. I have to wonder if that was just a catalyst for it, or if it really was a thing. at least at the time.
Well, I think a lot of people in-person meetings were a scourge, right? I mean, not for a lot of us, but for a lot of people before this, people would go into a meeting. That was the famous thing. You're in a big organization and you waste all your time in meetings. And now they're having the same meetings, but they're on Zoom. So they still suck. They're just sucking on Zoom instead of in person. So
I would point to one of Chuck's things and maybe some of the overall lessons learned. And I think maybe initially some of the Zoom fatigue is you hear people talking about, gee, they're on Zoom for, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And the thing for that is just wake the F up, get out of your chair, walk around. We're not brains in a jar. We have physical bodies, and to be effective, you need to schedule so you get physical activity that intersperses with what you're doing for work. And I think maybe this is the first time 100 million or more people en masse had to sort of struggle with, what do? They can't, even if they do have a single dedicated room that they use at home, they just can't be a hermit and lock themselves into it and expect to be effective. Our bodies have different rhythms in terms of need for exercise, need for food, need for bio breaks. And I think people have just suddenly realized en masse that while at the office, they could get up and they could go to the bathroom and then grab a coffee and they'd run into somebody and exchange some ideas and other things, that trying to force that into a Zoom situation just doesn't work as well.
Well, I think there's no balance. I'd be curious to see when people can go back to their offices. I think if it'll be a thing that there'll be certain aspects of Zoom that are functional. In other words, I could do a meeting from New York and I have to speak to 3 people in LA. Boom. I could do that without flying out there. The company doesn't have to pay for a hotel and all that stuff. Whereas you still have your local thing. Now, if there's like a 50-50 balance or a 60-40 balance, I'd be curious to see how people accept Zoom then. I mean, it may not be Zoom culture at that point. People may just say, oh, well, technology can work that way.
I think people are having a lot of Zoom fatigue.
Right.
Well, that's all we're doing right now is Zoom. But what I'm saying is when you get out of that and you can get back into the world, but use Zoom as an adjunct to save time and money. People may not have as much
I agree with Frank. I think that a lot of business behavior is going to be changed because they can realize that, yes, you don't need to fly and have that meeting. So I think that's going to be more interesting to see how that happens. I think also it may further lead to distributed work and people being able to either work more at home or work at a home and wherever that home is, around the country. It does not necessarily have to be in the headquarters city where the nominal job that they're fulfilling is. So I think those will be some ongoing things as a result of getting out of this.
No, I 100% see it. I mean, I'm watching all the people that I support, all the people that work in the company, they have had to adapt. We're in Microsoft Teams world, had to adapt to these meetings, and being in those meetings all the time is not anything unusual. My team, we meet every day. We never did that before. We used to have a once every other week meeting, if that. But a lot of teams are now meeting pretty consistent now, since they're not seeing everybody in person. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of difference. And then, like Mark said, I have this feeling that travel is gonna dip down, all the business travel, just because they're going to say, is there a real reason why do you need to fly out this location? Could you easily do it, over a video conference or over Teams or Zoom?
I want to follow up on that, but before I do, I want to welcome Andrew Orr, who's a latecomer, but always welcome. Andrew, good to see you.
Hey, I'm glad I could make it.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad you did. I don't know if you've been watching or listening to any of this before you got in here, but again, I want to follow up on David's point, but I'll give you a shot. What has been your experience in working from home during the pandemic? Did it change things for you in any significant fashion?
Not really. And I realize that I'm kind of privileged in saying that. My lifestyle hasn't really changed that much. I've been writing for various websites for a long time now. And speaking of Zoom fatigue, the Mac Observer is really the first website that I've written for where we do have regular meetings. We have a meeting every day. We used to use Google Hangouts, now we use Zoom. The websites that I've written for before, it was very kind of hands-off almost. It was mostly emailing and chatting in Slack. And so TMO is really, like I said, just I actually get to see the people that I'm working with every day, and it's kind of nice, actually.
Okay, so I'm going to, again, there's another point I want to make, but I want to go to Andrew and David. So those meetings that you're having now on a daily basis, the big question to me is, are they productive meetings? Do you feel that you get something out of it? Or is it something that you just, we meet it every morning, 9 a.m. to talk over things? Has that changed at all? And are they good, productive meetings? Or are they just, we got to show up because somebody says we got to show up?
For the most part, they've been pretty productive for me. There are times where we don't talk about work and we end up talking about fun things, and that actually kind of breaks up the monotony. But with my job and my counterparts who I work with are around the country, I don't get to have those types of interactive discussions all the time. So it really kind of breaks up the monotony of it all by being able to talk about something fun, whether it be sports or something related to technology that's not related to work or any of that kind of stuff. But when we do have meetings, we've most of the time they've been very productive because we find out about things. Oh, I didn't know you did that, or I didn't know you did that. So we would definitely get some major benefit out of them. But yeah, I say for the most part, they're beneficial. I'm
with David on that. Like we've been proactively working to eliminate meetings like as much as possible. So, when we had one that was once a week. Now we make it once every other week. It was an hour long. Now it's 45 minutes, and just doing what we can to help combat the Zoom fatigue as much as possible. Telling people like, hey, if you can schedule all your meetings, all your important meetings on one day, that way the rest of the week you don't have meetings, or you don't have to go to those other meetings. They might exist, but most of our Zoom calls are recorded, in meeting sense. So, as soon as the meeting's over, it's, hey, here you go. Here's the Zoom recording. If you want to know what happened, go right ahead. If not, here's the agenda. This is what we talked about. Here are the notes, all of that stuff. So there really is no pressure to sit on a call and feel like, wow, well, there's a lot of other things I could be doing right now. You don't have that as much. And I think that has to be a work culture and like a team culture thing of like, do we need this meeting? And sometimes, yes, we do need a meeting just to talk about what's going on in our day and just to have fun and unwind. We do happy hours, virtual happy hours. And it's like the only meeting I've ever gone to at work where I'm allowed to drink. So it's a great feeling to be able to say like, hey, we're unwinding because we're told, hey, you better unwind.
Hey, you got to be on this panel more often about the drinking thing.
I'm not a heavy drinker, but it is sometimes it's much needed.
Well, you're in the right place.
So something that both Frank and David said, but I want to take it another way. I don't think I'm not as concerned about the New York to LA trips. I'm thinking more about the 2 or 3 hour drives or 4 hour round trip drive that you have for a half hour meeting. And, and frankly, a lot of those meetings just, they weren't worth the time, but there was no other way to accomplish it. And I'm wondering, and I'm kind of hoping that, we will now all be comfortable enough with whatever platform, Zoom, Teams, whatever, that we could do that half hour meeting. So it only really costs me half an hour of my day instead of 4.5 to 5 hours of the day.
It also costs the company less money. And I think that's the main driving force on anything that happens in this country.
100%. The travel budgets have gone way down for a lot of companies, and we have so many ways of having meetings now. Not only Zoom, not only Teams. You got WebEx, you got Google Meet or whatever they call it now. But there's plenty of platforms out there that people are able to use and utilize to have these meetings. And as you said, Chuck, I mean, a lot of companies, a lot of people didn't want to do it. They were so used to going to travel to have to travel 2 hours going for a half-hour meeting, which is crazy. I would hear that all the time. Having to go visit clients, they have to either drive down or fly down, and it's an hour meeting, and then they got to go back. So it's just, I think getting these companies and the folks on board to doing this is probably been the toughest thing, but they haven't had a choice. So I think it's finally become to a realization. And just like companies who didn't want to get people to allow them to work from home, that was such a big hoo-ha. A lot of companies didn't want people to work from home. Oh, maybe you could work 1 day a week. It isn't going to be beneficial. But then this hit, and hello, we're working from home now. So I think a lot of this we've learned we're going to get out of this that's going to make it even more of a fact that we're going to be doing more of these virtual meetings, even though once things do finally loosen up and when we're not having as much of a problem.
I think Jay's point about excuse me, the recordings are one thing, but something I've noticed too, when you have a little bit larger meeting, I honestly believe that there's potentially better participation because I don't have to have the floor to be in order to make a point. I can throw it into chat, and I might get a lot of people, agreeing with it, or they might disagree with it. And sort of like the chat rooms here that we operate, the chat room might be theoretically having a whole separate conversation from what we are, or they may be contributing to this. So there's sort of the meeting underneath the meeting that's going on, and that information can be captured so that it's not lost, after the meeting. And I think those are parts that people are just starting to realize as they get better and get more comfortable with Zoom. But that's where I stand.
This was all starting, it was all happening beforehand. I mean, I participated in several online conferences and hosted one even over the last 5 years before COVID. So, this just sort of like accelerated it. But, I think, the question is what's going to happen when everybody can go back. Will they? And a lot of people will, but I think a lot of this will continue on because there's a lot of advantages. And the chat is, I remember noticing that in one of the first online ones I went to, and like, oh my gosh, I'm getting, as much out of the chat as I am out of the person talking. And then, I've gone to in-person sessions since then, and like, I wonder what everybody around me is thinking, but there's no chat. So, sometimes Twitter will do that for some events, but it's not really as good as having a dedicated chat right to that. It's great. And then the fact that you can have people participate from all over the world, both participants and speakers. So, you can have the best speakers, regardless of where they happen to be. You're a little bit limited on time zones, but that's about it. So, and I think there's a lot of stuff, like I'm doing an online class right now for Panorama users, and there's not enough Panorama users to do that as a live thing. There weren't enough people that would travel, but since it can be done online. We've got people from Italy to New Zealand, and they're all participating live. It's, and that could never have happened.
Brittany, you said early on that you live on Zoom at this point, and for obvious reasons. But how's this going to affect you? Because especially with your clientele and the individuals that you say really need that in-person thing.
Well, I wanted to add something to what Jim said. So I'm also on the International Conference on ADHD committee. And one of the pieces of feedback we got from this year was that people really liked engaging in the chat while the talk was happening. And while that might lead to some people to be distracted, it also was a huge benefit for some folks. Like some of them had really engaging conversations about the topic that was happening. And of course, the presenter could also be in the chat because it was a video recording, but it was an interesting dynamic that was actually really popular with a lot of people. Some people really do benefit from meeting in person. I have one client I haven't seen since lockdown because apparently this is the thing I get is mosquitoes with my virtual background.
The virtual mosquitoes.
They're virtual, yeah. Some people don't want to meet virtually. And there is a nice thing about being in person. We can be, look at the same thing at the same time. You can do that to some extent on Zoom. But for some people, it means we can work together when they live far away. Now, I was already doing that before pandemic. I was a little bit concerned about the amount of time I was spending on Zoom last January. But it has only increased. But I do try to do things like, coaching is an activity where if you're doing it right, your brain gets a little foggy after a bit because you're doing a lot of hard thinking. And I did this before, but it's even more important now. I have a break in the middle where we get up and stretch and do a different thing for a couple minutes and then come back to it. And it helps with creative problem solving. And anyway, lots of good evidence, but it also means you get to get up from it for a minute. and that's important for me because I was getting repetitive stress injuries from being on Zoom all day. And even though I do things like have my bicycle desk underneath me so that I can move a little bit. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but it's been interesting.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's it. There's so many different angles you can take some of this stuff from. The other thing, though, that I've noticed is that people, when they tend to schedule Zoom meetings, they schedule a Zoom meeting from here to there, from 2 to 3, from 1 to 2. And everybody expects, unlike a physical meeting, that when 2 o'clock comes, I've got other things to do. See ya. I don't find very many Zoom meetings carrying over. Now, our sessions here are an exception, but this is a little bit different situation. But when it comes to the business thing, I mean, you schedule a meeting from 1 to 2, and yeah, I'm sorry, I've got to drop off. I've got another appointment. I've got another Zoom meeting. I've got something that I've got to go do. And I
do think there's a tendency to do back-to-backs, which I think is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Just you need a break.
That was always a bad idea, even when you're in person.
Right. Yeah. It was a bad idea even in person. I think there's more of a temptation to do it when it's virtual. And that's not a good idea. But I think it depends on the organization, Chuck. I have also seen people who are perfectly happy to go over time because it's virtual and you don't have anywhere to physically be.
That's interesting. And you may be right about that, Brittany. You absolutely may be right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's hit or miss depending on the meeting. I mean, I've been like the meetings for my team. It's open for them. So if we have something we're talking about, it's a hot topic, and we go past. We're from 10 to 11 our time, my time. If it goes past 11 o'clock, then we'll keep chatting. I mean, even the meetings I have for our full team across the world, those meetings can go over to an hour and a half, depending on if there's a hot topic. But that's the type of topics that we discuss. In the business side of things with these meetings, every meeting I've been into, they've tended to stayed right on to the 1 to 2, and okay, the meeting's over. We'll bring this up next week or whatever it is. So I think they're getting smarter with it. But at first, I agree, they weren't as on time for the most part.
Well, and my people have a tendency to talk a lot. And I used to have a timer that sat there in person. So we could both be reminded that time is a real thing that flows linearly, whether we like it or not. Right. And I recently set up a thing for my coaching clients so that I have a little picture-in-picture of the timer so that we can both see what time it is.
Yeah. I think one aspect might be an in-person meeting. The participants tend to have more invested. Like, Chuck's mentioning, well, if you had to drive 2 hours to get here, then maybe you're not, like, oh, all right, let's get out of here on the dot. It's like, we already did all this driving, might as well stay an extra 15 minutes or a half an hour or whatever. So that might be, part of the reason where with an online meeting, it's like, well, it's easy in, easy out, on to the next thing. Although an awful lot of the Zoom things I'm on tend to run late, but they tend to be more like this, or, I've got, meetings that are more casual and not business related.
That wraps up part 2 in our 3-part conversation about the 1-year anniversary of the lockdown and working from home and what it has meant to all of us. In the final part, we go beyond just the normal Zoom meetings that we all have for businesses and scale up to some of the virtual conferences that we've experienced over the past year and what will happen in the future, whether future conferences will go virtual, will go hybrid, or go back to being strictly in person. That's next time on MacVoices. Until then, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.